Cronkite, and Eric Severide in Washington, Nelson Benton in Youngstown, Ohio, David Shoemaker in Battle Creek, Michigan, John Hart in San Antonio, Texas, and tonight, part 3 of a special report, Where They Stand, the candidates on the issues of Campaign 68.
Good evening. This was the day of high expectations that finally there would be a major breakthrough in the deadlocked Paris talks on Vietnam. Those hopes had been nourished by a week of rumors and speculation that some positive developments were imminent. The focus was on Hanoi's chief negotiator, Xuan Thuy, as he arrived at the old Majestic Hotel for the 27th formal meeting with U.S. representatives. Moments later, his counterpart, Ambassador Averell Harriman, arrived, hopefully to receive word that Hanoi had agreed to President Johnson's latest terms for an end to the bombing in North Vietnam. There were a lot of words. The session lasted 2.5 hours, but like the others before it, it ended without any visible sign of progress toward peace. However, there was a hint that Harriman is continuing his efforts in secret talks with Thuy. After today's session, Harriman told reporters that there would be another meeting tomorrow. His aides hastened to assure the newsmen that the remark was just, quote, a slip of the tongue. Meanwhile, there was a report out of London that Washington had asked the Soviet Union to intercede with North Vietnam again. CBS News, White House correspondent Dan Rather learned that Mr. Johnson reviewed the Vietnam situation with his top advisors late today, but a White House spokesman refused to talk about the meeting or even confirm that it had taken place. Senior American officers in South Vietnam's northern provinces today rejected suggestions that the current lull in fighting is a result of enemy de-escalation. They estimated that North Vietnam still has 100,000 troops deployed in those provinces. And they argued that any enemy forces pulling back across the demilitarized zone did so only to regroup and resupply themselves. The U.S. command reported today that Marine patrols spotted more than 400 communist troops near the Tung Duc Special Forces camp and called in air and artillery strikes that killed 178 of them. In Saigon, a terrorist bomb exploded near the busy Central Market, killing 2 South Vietnamese women and injuring 17 other civilians.
Yes, I'm leaving now.
One of the prices we pay for civilization is what most people call acid indigestion, gas, heartburn, a tense, tight stomach. Well, now there's a modern solution to this distressing problem: Digel. Digel, the extra action antacid with the extra action of simethicone. Look, this white layer of Digel contains effective antacids to neutralize excess acid. This yellow layer contains simethicone in a patented formulation which breaks up bubbles of gas to help relax your tense, tight stomach. Digel with simethicone works as no plain antacid can to give you more complete relief. Digel, the extra action antacid, tablets or liquid.
In Ohio today, George Wallace found himself heckled by black power demonstrators and again the target of tossed eggs and other objects. In addition, the former Alabama governor faced some questioning about comments made by his running mate. Nelson Benton reports.
While George Wallace campaigned in the Midwest, there cropped up either a difference in philosophies or a breakdown of communications with his running mate. In Florida, Curtis LeMay was asked if he thought integration is the key to solving the nation's racial crisis.
I think that it does. Probably other opinions on the subject, but at the moment I think it does because I've seen it work in the Air Force for so long, and so I naturally lean towards that solution. Maybe there are other solutions. There usually are other solutions to a problem, but I have seen integration work in the Air Force, and I know that one will.
Wallace, who has staunchly advocated segregated schools in his own state, is seldom at a loss for words. This morning in Youngstown, Ohio, was an exception.
He was talking about the military, and this is not an issue in the campaign for the president.
He was talking about schools specifically,
Well, I don't know. I have to read the statement, but the schools are supposed to be left up in control of local people.
It is not likely to be the last of their differences. It is certainly not the first. There was discord of a more direct sort when the third-party candidate went downtown for his Youngstown rally.
I can't tell the he's from the she's in that crowd out there, but, ma'am, I'm pretty hard, pretty difficult. All right, go ahead and throw something else. You're brave throwing things. Just throw things. Throw something else.
At one point, a Wallace supporter tore a sign from a heckler's hands. Police tore him from the crowd.
And 3.5 weeks ago, Mr. Nixon said, we're not even going to mention George Wallace or the American Independent Party. And every day since that time, they have mentioned nothing but the American Independent Party and George Wallace.
The Wallace-LeMay campaign has been constantly one of differences and divisions. The recurring philosophical differences between the members of the ticket themselves and the constant and perpetual differences among the crowds who turn out to see them speak. Nelson Denton, CBS News, with the Wallace campaign in Youngstown, Ohio.
The speculation about a possible breakthrough in Vietnam negotiations was reflected in the presidential campaign today as Richard Nixon stumped in Michigan. David Shoemaker reports.
The real difference between the Nixon of 1960 and the Nixon of 1968 is that this time Nixon is way ahead. That gives him the breathing space to look around and plan. That's also the advantage of long-range scheduling in this kind of standard rally. Gives him time to think. Right now, concern about the Vietnam talks and what they might mean to the campaign is growing inside the Nixon organization. While the cheering goes on, there have been more discussions about Vietnam negotiations among the staff in the past week than ever before. The way Nixon has decided to handle the problem became obvious today.
On the other side, we have a man who offers to the problems that we are confronted with in the world today and the very delicate negotiations that are going on in Paris today and in Washington and in Saigon. What he brings to that problem is this: the fastest, loosest tongue ever in American politics. That's what he brings. My friends, never have we had a man who has been on more sides of more issues than Hubert Humphrey. On this great issue of war and peace, on the great issue particularly of whether or not we should have a bombing pause, he's been for it unconditionally, and then he said we should have conditions. He has been unable to mind his tongue when negotiations are going on. And this is the point that I make. In this terribly important function of keeping the peace, you must remember that when there is miscalculation, when a potential enemy is not sure what you stand for, that's when the danger of war escalates.
There's increasing suspicion inside the Nixon organization that there may be some breakthrough in the Vietnam negotiations between now and Election Day. If that should happen, Nixon wants to be standing close to Lyndon Johnson, if possible even closer than Hubert Humphrey. And if there is no breakthrough, well, after all, it's still the Democrats' war. David Shoemaker, CBS News, with the Nixon campaign in Michigan.
Hubert Humphrey had a few things to say about Nixon today, too. He accused Nixon of compromising on principles and on human rights in choosing Spiro Agnew as his running mate. And in Humphrey's words, think what he will do if he gets into the White House. Humphrey spoke at the Alamo in San Antonio, Texas, and John Hart reports.
In the closing days of this campaign, Hubert Humphrey's men are saying outright their job is to make their shredding coalition of minorities work once more. In Texas, that means Mexican Americans. At the Alamo, they heard him ask they put faith in simple political virtues.
I intend to win this presidency by doing what's right. Some people tell me it's unpopular. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the search for popularity is a sickness that has no place in the White House. What you want in the White House is not necessarily popularity. What you want in the White House is someone that believes in principle and will stand up for his country and stand up for what's right. Listen, my friends from Texas, you ought to whip these Republicans for just the way that they've abused your president. You ought to give them a licking just on that. I don't think you ought to leave it to a Scandinavian from Minnesota to do all the protection and the defense of President Lyndon Johnson. Now let's go on out and give these Republicans a weapon. Listen, thank you for what you have done for me, for my spirit. Thank you for what you've done for this campaign. You know what it means to fight an uphill battle? Yes, you do. Most of us have. And all during these weeks, I've been told that it was impossible. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you know what America is. It's the country that did the impossible. Always we've been able to do the impossible. And we're going to do it again.
It is the thinking of the Humphrey men that without a heavy vote by Mexican Americans here, Hubert Humphrey will have little chance of winning Texas. And that if this were not a three-way race, he would have no chance at all. John Hart, CBS News, with the Humphrey campaign at the Alamo, San Antonio.
As a campaign gimmick, Dick Gregory, the former comedian running for president on the Freedom and Peace ticket, has distributed political flyers resembling dollar bills. Today, the Secret Service said they look too much like the real thing and acknowledged that quantities of them have been confiscated. There were complaints that some of Gregory's flyers have been turning up in automatic dollar-changing machines. But we can tell you they don't work the one in the CBS cafeteria.
The acid test. Watch us dramatize how Prestone gives your car extra protection against corrosion. Half of this metal gets coated with magnetic film in Prestone antifreeze, and half goes into antifreeze with ordinary corrosion inhibitors. Into hot acid, one is destroyed in seconds. Look at magnetic film's extra protection. Remember,
never pick up a stranger, pick up Prestone antifreeze.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 ordinary batteries. Now, just one ever-ready alkaline energizer lasts up to 10 times longer than ordinary batteries. In heavy-duty use, in constant use, in continuous use. Get the golden ones. Golden ever-ready alkaline energizers last up to 10 times longer. That's power to spare. Products of Union Carbide.
There was no official comment, but some high Vatican officials reacted with disbelief today to a statement by Richard Cardinal Cushing that the former Jacqueline Kennedy could marry whomever she wants. In a talk in Boston last night, Cardinal Cushing defended the former First Lady's right to marry Aristotle Onassis despite his divorce. He also said he had refused to try to stop the marriage, though urged to intervene by persons, quote, intimately related, unquote, to the family and the administration of President Kennedy. The Vatican has taken the position that because of her marriage, Mrs. Onassis is barred from church sacraments. President Johnson's Commission on Violence took up the subject of student protest today at the hearing in Washington. One commission member, longshoreman philosopher Eric Hoffer, voiced his disgust upon hearing the testimony of Henry Mayer, a leader of the 1966 student demonstrations at the University of California in Berkeley.
And instead of turning to student protests and the search for causes, you would do well to question the persons responsible for that arrogant exercise and sustained official violence, the war in Vietnam. I hope you will not confuse the causes of our social ills with those who use their voices, their careers, and their bodies to protest the existence of such evils. Moreover, I hope you will find some remedy for the crazed behavior of a society which endorses violent physical attacks upon protesters instead of social and political attacks upon the problems which give rise to protests.
There is, to me, it just doesn't make sense when I get on the campus and I watch these people there. All of you assume that there is a relation, there's an inner necessity here that's forcing people to protest. You eliminate the whole playfulness. They're having a ball. They're having the best time of their lives there. And this is much easier than studying. This is much easier. I always used to tell longshoremen, it's much harder to write a good paragraph than to start a revolution. Anytime. And to me, an uneducated person, when I come to a campus where you expect educated people to behave in an educated way, and they're behaving like hoodlums, this is something that you can swallow. See? Actually, you have a much more civilized society on the waterfront in San Francisco than you have on the campus in Berkeley. See? That's a fact. I believe that as long as they can get away with it, there's going to be hell to the end of this century.
It may take that long to settle the grievances.
They ain't going to settle nothing, because the moment the one grievance is satisfied, you're going to have 100,000 other grievances. These people do not believe in democracy. You try to dissent from their dissenting, you know where you're going to end up. See, they don't believe in the democratic process. And so I'm sitting here and listening to all this learned stuff there, and I just can't swallow it.
In the Middle East today, Egypt claimed its Air Force shot down 2 Israeli jets in a dogfight over the Suez Canal zone city of Ismailia. Israel denied any losses. And there was another exchange of gunfire between Israeli and Jordanian troops across the Jordan River, neither side reporting any casualties. 9 anti-Castro Cubans were arrested in New York today in connection with that recent series of bombings at foreign consulates and tourist offices in the metropolitan area. Most of the targets were offices of countries trading with Cuba. Dr. Christian Bernard was admitted to Groote Schuur Hospital in Cape Town, South Africa today, the same hospital where he performed the world's first heart transplant operation. A hospital bulletin said he was in satisfactory condition after suffering a mild intestinal hemorrhage, possibly due to stress.
These are ruberoid vinyl floors. They look so beautiful because they look so real. They look so real because we make them a different way, with a process called gravure that reproduces a brick floor that looks like brick, a flagstone floor that looks like flagstone. In fact, we could make an authentic-looking vinyl floor out of anything that can be photographed. Anything.
GAF Ruberoid, the very authentic vinyl floors.
The GAF Anscomatic Super 8 movie camera has things maybe you don't need. It has a 6-to-1 zoom lens. Who needs that? It has instant slow motion. Who needs that? And it has automatic exposure control. And who needs that? The instant loading GAF Anscomatic has a lot of things that aren't necessary. Just nice. The people at GAF make cameras, film, building supplies, chemicals, copying machines, and a lot more.
One of the overriding issues of Campaign 68 is the war in Vietnam. Tonight's report in our series on the candidates and where they stand deals with that issue. In front of cameras, Hubert Humphrey and George Wallace separately answered our questions for these reports. Richard Nixon declined, and his positions were gleaned from his campaign appearances, including videotape recordings made available by his staff. Tonight's first question: would you favor ending the bombing of North Vietnam?
If we can have a bombing pause without endangering the lives of our fighting men, and if that bombing pause will increase the chances for an honorable and peaceful end of the war, then we are for it. But the main thing is, let us see to it that we, at this time, recognize we have one president at a time, and I, as a political candidate, will do nothing to pull the rug out from under him so that he can end this war before this election, if possible.
Well, I've spoken on this matter, and I've said that I thought that ending the bombing was an acceptable risk for success in the negotiations for peace. I've also said, however, that before making that decision, that I would seek evidence, either direct or indirect, by word or deed, that North Vietnam would restore the demilitarized zone. In other words, to pull out the troops that are there. But I do consider ending the bombing an acceptable risk for peace. Hanoi has said that they would negotiate if that took place. If they did not, in other words, if they did not negotiate in good faith, or if they did not act in good faith, I would surely feel free to resume the bombing.
I would favor doing whatever's in the interest of helping to bring the conflict to a solution, to a close. I'm not a military man, and I again emphasize that if we do not have an honorable negotiated settlement in Paris, which is a diplomatic and political settlement, and bring the American servicemen home, then I would ask the military to bring a military conclusion with conventional weapons to the war and bring the servicemen home.
Would you include the National Liberation Front in a coalition government for South Vietnam?
If we impose, by negotiation, a coalition government with communists in the government on South Vietnam, that will be an encouragement to not only the North Vietnamese, but to the Communist Chinese and the Soviet Union to try it again. It will end this war, and it'll bring home the 19 and 20-year-old boys that are out there now, and their 14 and 15-year-old brothers will be fighting someplace else again. I don't want that to happen. I say let's end this war on a basis that will discourage that kind of aggression rather than encourage it. Now, does this mean that this does not allow any place in the government or any place in the participation of Vietnam, the Viet Cong? Not at all. But I do not think that we should impose, against the will of the people of Vietnam, a communist government upon them. That's why I'm against a coalition. Let the people decide. Let the people decide, and I think that that kind of a settlement is one that gives us the running room to negotiate, which can bring this war to an end.
I find that coalition government always results in the communist takeover. And in my judgment, that's why we're in Vietnam. And to have a coalition government, in my judgment, would mean that the communists would take over South Vietnam, and I'm not for that.
Well, I am opposed to a coalition government being imposed by either Washington or Hanoi. I'm opposed to any form of government being imposed by pressure from Washington or by force from North Vietnam. I support, however, free elections, one man, one vote. And I do believe that the people of South Vietnam, all people that are willing to accept the results of an election and to engage in peaceful processes of the election, that all people should have a chance to cast a vote and select their government. Now, in so doing, that means that you would permit members of the NLF to participate if they're willing to accept the outcome of a free election.
In our next report, the candidates take a stand on the draft and the treaty to stop the spread of nuclear weapons. With cigarette smoking and advertising undiminished, the American Cancer Society today announced a new effort to change the nation's smoking habits. It said a major goal will be the elimination of cigarette advertising, hopefully by voluntary self-regulation rather than by government action. This is part of a 9-point program aimed at making it easier for a smoker to give up cigarettes and for non-smokers to avoid the habit. The U.S. Olympic Committee is reported to have evidence that a few U.S. track medal winners accepted money and goods from manufacturers of athletic equipment in violation of amateur rules. One report said the payments ranged from $500 to several $1,000s. In Mexico City, the committee's president, Douglas Roby, said that some of the money had been turned in voluntarily, but he refused to name any individuals involved. He raised the possibility that some medals won by the U.S. team may be returned.
You're suddenly shapelier. You're suddenly shapelier. You're suddenly shapelier in a Playtex Cross Your Heart bra. Its secret? This Playtex shaping crosses your heart with stretch to lift and separate. You're suddenly shapelier in a Playtex Cross Your Heart bra. You'll see. Get one and pass the word. You're suddenly shapelier. You're suddenly shapelier.
This woman has what every woman wants. Soft hands and hard nails. No lotion can give you both. Only gloves can help. Playtex gloves. They're fully lined to keep your hands safe from water that's too hot, rough cleansers, detergent that's too strong. Yes, Playtex gloves can help you have soft hands and hard nails. Buy now. Get an extra glove free. Almost like 2 pair for the price of 1.
Apollo 7 astronauts Wally Schirra, Don Isley, and Walter Cunningham were given a hero's welcome today when they flew back to Cape Kennedy from the aircraft carrier Essex to begin 3 days of flight debriefing. This was the scene.
course, is to come home. We were here for a number of months, but we left rather suddenly. Now we're back. And it's a real treat to... Now, of course, we're all looking at the people who gave us a great send-off, and the real treat, of course, is a great return. Thank you.
This is Eric Severide in Washington. If Captain Walter Schirra and his two colleagues from Apollo 7 are over that headachy, fluey feeling by now, they are probably reading what us Earthlings have been saying about them. The editorial in today's New York Daily News, for example, which says, "Will NASA please be good enough to have future space voyages captained and conducted by astronauts whose minds are attuned primarily to science? Such men could be expected to refrain from getting into petty squabbles with mission control on the ground. Roger and over," says the news. Okay, over to Miss Mary McGrory in the Washington Star, whose article is captioned, "At last, a hero like the rest of us." People understand Schirra's behavior with no trouble, says Miss McGrory. There he was, a fellow with a bad cold, trying to do a tough job, while people 100 miles down were harassing him about trying a lot of other things while he was up there. He made space travel, she says, sound like any kind of air travel, known to everybody who's ever fastened a seatbelt. The food was bad, the cabin was crowded. When passengers tried to sleep, some fatuous announcement came over the public address system. Everybody on Earth identified with Schirra because everybody puts up with some kind of mission control center in their lives. For the writer, it's the editor. For the quarterback, it's the coach. Schirra talked back to his center, and if, says Miss McGrory, Humphrey and Nixon did the same to theirs, they'd be further along. People like this reporter who sit at the wrong end of the TV camera, the target end, sympathize with Schirra without even trying. Any television production has not only a mission control center, but tackles, guards, and tight ends, to say nothing of all the loose ends. The general sensation of the man at the target end is that of being bitten to death by ducks. And Schirra and company were working not only at the wrong end of gravity, but at the wrong end of television cameras at the same time. He may have lost his cool, but he didn't lose Apollo 7, and that's what counts. At times, we suspect, he might have appreciated a paraphrase of Kipling, voiced by some anonymous victim of TV's Mission Control Center. If you can keep your cool while all those about you are losing theirs, maybe you don't understand the situation. Walter?
And that's the way it is. Wednesday, October 23rd, 1968. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. Good night.
This has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. America's Wonderlands, the National Parks, a National Geographic Society color special tonight on CBS.